Let's continue with the discussion on proteins. First, I want to correct something that green stuff on eggs is not something to worry about. It's the formation of a compound called ferrous sulfide, where the iron in the yolk meets the hydrogen sulfide from the albumin or the white. So don't be afraid of the words ferrous sulfide. It's iron and it's compounds that are naturally present in the egg. And go ahead, eat them. Let's talk about the functions of protein. Low quality and high quality dietary proteins support the following functions: growth, repair, and maintenance of tissue, enzymes that are catalysts that speed up reactions. Proteins are used to make antibodies and other members of our immune system response. They're important for maintaining fluid and electrolyte balance. They're also involved in maintaining our blood pH or acid-base balance. Amino acids are used to synthesize hormones like insulin and glucagon, which we'll talk about shortly when we go over diabetes, as well as secretin and CCK that are involved in digestion. Proteins also help transport nutrients. We talked about lipoproteins when we looked at fat digestion. Hemoglobin is a protein that transports iron. And last but not least is energy. When the body needs energy and it's not getting energy from carbohydrate or fat, the body will break down protein for energy and get 4 calories per gram. What you need to understand is that when the body is using protein for energy, it is sacrificing all these other functions. Oh, and I'll also be discussing nitrogen balance shortly. I want to talk to you, and I think what I'll do is wait for class about protein deficiency, a condition called kwashiorkor. People on the top of this slide on the left have a condition called marasmus. That is protein energy malnutrition, where they're not getting calories or protein, and they look malnourished. But the child on the bottom has a condition called kwashiorkor. They may not look underweight because they have a belly and they have chubby legs, but this is due to a condition called edema, because the body doesn't have protein to help maintain fluid balance, and so the fluids are leaking out of the cell into the surrounding tissue. I'll go over this in class. Both of these conditions occur primarily in third world country, but in the United States, folks who are on starvation diets, whether voluntary or involuntary, if they're poor or abused, can also experience these conditions. Kwashiorkor means the evil spirit that infects the first child when the second child is born. Stay tuned. What I do want you to know, though, is if caught in time, a child with kwashiorkor can be rehabilitated. First, you want to replace vitamins, fluids, and carbohydrate. Then, once you've established fluid balance and maintained blood pressure, you can introduce proteins. You may need to wait on dairy because after this huge insult to the system, there may be a lactose intolerance. And finally, the last nutrient, the one that's more complicated to digest and absorb, because you need lipoproteins to transport fat, is triglyceride. So children with protein energy malnutrition can be rehabilitated, but it must be done in the correct order and they must be caught in time. While rare, excess dietary protein can be harmful. Sometimes this excess protein will be seen in athletes and folks following fad diets, and the risks of excess dietary protein can be high cholesterol and heart disease, because diets high in protein are often from animal sources that contain saturated fat, and saturated fat can increase blood cholesterol levels and blood cholesterol can increase heart attack risk. Also, folks who may have a risk of kidney disease may be susceptible if they consume large amounts of dietary protein. I'm not particularly worried about the healthy adults because the data primarily comes from rat studies and we're not rats. But if you have any family history of kidney disease, that's something that you might want to pay attention to because the kidney is what processes the nitrogen that gets split off from the protein during the metabolic process because we don't get energy from nitrogen. Bone loss, I just have to tell you, there's no evidence that high protein diets can lead to bone loss unless you're not getting adequate dietary calcium to begin with. There was some stories going around for a while that Americans have the highest calcium intake in the world from milk, and we also had the highest incidence of osteoporosis. Well, I need to see the data that supports that. I have been told by sources, anecdote alert, those sources being students who are bodybuilders or no bodybuilders, that this is actually something that a bodybuilder would eat in a day. Obviously, I've formatted this picture to fit the slide, but I'm not interested in that picture as much as I am all the food that this person is eating, and food like substances such as supplements, powders, no chocolate. So this would be a sample diet in a day of a bodybuilder. Anecdote alert. Let's analyze that bodybuilder's diet. It was 5,500 calories. 36% of those calories come from protein. That's within the guidelines, but within those guidelines, because he eats so many calories, that translates into 495 grams of protein. That's huge. Also 49% carbohydrate and 15% fat. So what does it take to gain muscle? Not as much as you want to think. A pound of muscle is 75% water, 20% protein, and 5% other materials like fat, glycogen, minerals, and enzymes. So in a pound of muscle, we have 105 grams of protein. To gain 1 pound of muscle over a 2-week period, an athlete would need to consume an extra 7 to 8 grams of protein per day in addition to what their body normally requires. 7 to 8 grams. What does that translate into? 1 ounce of meat, or 1 cup of milk, or 3 ounces of bread. Just saying. That's it. Let me talk to you about nitrogen balance. Positive nitrogen balance is when nitrogen consumption through the diet is greater than nitrogen excretion. That would mean the individual is in positive nitrogen balance and is using that nitrogen to synthesize new tissue. An example of somebody in positive nitrogen balance would be a growing child, a pregnant woman, or somebody recovering from an illness. Negative nitrogen balance occurs when nitrogen consumption is less than nitrogen excretion. What's happening is the body is catabolizing or breaking down proteins because they're being used for energy, and that nitrogen is getting excreted in the urine. This can occur from starvation, consumption of very low energy diets, serious burns. You can read the examples. Nitrogen equilibrium occurs when nitrogen consumption is equal to nitrogen excretion, usually seen in healthy adults who are not pregnant. So the amount of nitrogen being consumed in the diet is equal to the amount that's being lost in the urine. To summarize, dietary protein is denatured before it is digested. The amino acids from the diet are used by cells to make protein by converting DNA into messenger RNA and then taking that message out into the cell, getting those amino acids together and making protein. Proteins have many functions in the body, and protein deficiency is called kwashiorkor. We also looked at nitrogen balance and the amount of protein that is needed on a daily basis in order to safely gain a pound of muscle over a 2-week period. That's it. See you in class. Bye-bye.